what we know from research is that when a baby boy is born, he is held less, caressed less, talked to in a rougher tone, handled more roughly, allowed to be by himself more. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? From the moment a baby boy is born, we already start to disconnect from that child. And then we have the audacity to judge and shame men when they struggle to connect and get into relationships 25, 20, 16 years later, when that's been a part of our interactions with them since the day they were born. So let's talk about the man rules. These are the rules that we follow as little boys. It's the water. As soon as we're born, we're starting to learn the man rules.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Melvin Valentine. I'm the Senior Manager for Learning and Development. What we have here today is we have our CB Men's Group, and we want to thank you so much for joining us on this day of learning as we focus on T-Rock. Today's conversation, we're going to talk about man rules. Man rules, those are those laws or those unwritten things that we're taught as men or that we see from other men around us. You know, men need to be strong, men don't cry, things like that we may learn on the playground. We were basing our conversation off of this up and coming book called Man Rules by the author Dan Griffin. So we borrowed some of our resources from there and some of our questions. It's something that I think about all the time. You know, what are the things that are kind of like embedded in me as a guy that I feel I have to show or I have to do to be a part of or to be accepted as being a man. And today, you know, I have some gentlemen from our CB Men's Group. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it around and allow them to introduce themselves. Let's start with Joe, who is our executive sponsor.
Hello, everyone. Joe Gallardo, Senior Director of Operations for our prevention team.
All right. Thank you for joining us, Joe. And then, of course, we have Christopher. Christopher, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Christopher Mullen, Director of Information Systems.
All right. Thank you so much, Christopher. And, of course, we have Alex. Alex, go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Garcia. I'm the Director of Intake and Outreach.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex Garcia. And, of course, we got our other Alex. We got Alex O. Alex, would you please introduce yourself?
Alex Ofonye, Director of Day Treatment Intensive.
There we go. Thank you so much. All right. And of course, we got Tony.
What's going on, everyone? Good morning. Tony Salgado, mental health intake therapist.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. And of course, we got Marco. Marco, go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
Hello, I'm Marco Gonzalez. I am the wraparound admin assistant.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. So let's get our conversation going. So we got a nice assortment of gentlemen representing all different aspects of Children's Bureau. And I'm going to start with the first question in regards to man rules. What did your father or father figure teach you about being a man in actions or in words, right? Many times our fathers, they have these sayings. I remember vividly this one time my father was working on his car and I'm leaning over into the engine compartment just watching, trying to see what he's doing, and he leans over to me and he says, a man should always have a toolbox. And to this day that moment is burnt in my head, and I have like a large assortment of tools. Anytime something's broken around the house, I know that Home Depot has a tool that I can use to fix it. And I try to embed that on my sons, and they're just not as crafty, you know, they just don't get it. So things like that. So what is it, one of those things that your father figure taught you about being a man? I think I'm going to pass that question to Joe first.
Thank you, Melvin. To be honest with you, growing up, my father wasn't around much. And when he was very stern and very strict. One of the biggest things or takeaways I got from him is that men aren't supposed to be vulnerable. We're not supposed to show emotion. That when we do show emotion or vulnerability, that it makes us weak. And to be honest with you, I think the complete opposite of that. I think vulnerability and showing your emotions makes you a stronger man instead of making you look weak. So that was one of the biggest takeaways I got from him. In addition to that, it's all the cliche ones like men don't cry. men are supposed to be the providers of the family. Men are supposed to be, the ones that are handy at home. That's all great and all, but some of us are not handy. Some of us don't know how to work on cars and things like that. But those were like the things I got from my father.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Likewise, likewise. What about you, Tony? What were some things that your father figure kind of embedded in you, and you thought like, okay, this is what you need to do or be in order to be a man?
Right. You know what? If I could go back to Joe, I gotta respect, your experience. And maybe we all share some commonality, right? So I respect my father, and I want to say that publicly here, but he was there, but wasn't there emotionally and socially, if that makes any sense. So he would always be like, "You gotta be doing something. You gotta be doing something." So there was no such thing as self-care during the weekend. So in the weekend, it was like ever since sun comes out, you gotta either be sweeping, do a chore, this, that, do some work, that. So there was no self-care. So in reality, he wasn't there for the whole social development. So I wasn't even aware of what, like having fun at the park was all about. So it was that, a man is always busy, a man is always busy, a man is always on the go, a man is always being productive. You always gotta find ways to make money, or just keep yourself busy. You're not going to be a lazy man. You're not going to be a lazy person. Because if you relax, then that's more for ladies because they're relaxing after cooking and all of this. So that was the differentiation. So my experience was more, sort of like the psychological confusion is like, when am I going to have fun? No. There's going to be time for that later.
Mm.
And so I believe in a nutshell, that was my experience of my father, just ingraining, always being busy, always working, always doing something.
Mm. There we go. Okay. All right. So always having to be scheduled and just constantly working, never getting rest. So how does that show up when we think about like wellness for ourselves, right? Are we able to take a break? All right. Alex, what about you? What are some of your thoughts as far as things that you may have learned from your father figures that kind of shaped man rules that you hold to yourself today?
think I think it's very interesting combining what Tony and Joe just said because I'm just right there in the middle. My dad is, very handy, very hands-on, and at the same time, he said, listen, none of you, my children, and your children will grow up doing handiwork. And I'm asking him, okay, what does that mean? But you're doing it. He said, yeah, I'll do it. But you're going to write with pen and paper to make your money. That none of you will do this handiwork. And he goes on to also say the same thing like what Tony is saying, but you need to make sure you stay busy, fix what your home needs. And growing up now, and I'm asking myself, if you didn't teach me, how am I supposed to, learn how to fix it? Okay, I'm going to work with my pen and paper, but I'm going to need to call somebody to come fix it. But this is what I know he knows how to do. So in between it, yes, there's that struggle between, what exactly is the perfect message, growing up. But I realize there's none. The choice is mine, to either learn it or not to learn it, So I didn't really grow up with specifics of here it is, but they were all passed down, even observing my uncles and his brothers, what they did and how they did it, so that's, my growing up with man's rule.
Mm-hmm. See, I think a lot of us kind of feel that way or go through that because we got to figure out for ourselves what's being a man to me. How can I be my authentic self? Because not all man rules are bad. Some of them are good for us. It's just us kind of figuring it out. So Alex Garcia, what about you? What are some of your thoughts in regards to some of what other gentlemen said and some of the things you see from your father figures growing up?
I would like to say that I was allowed to be vulnerable. I was allowed to have feelings and emotions for whatever reason. My dad wasn't your typical Latino Mexican machismo. He was born in the US, but my grandfather, his father, was born in Mexico. But I think one of the things he did instill with me is always having respect for your elders. And then I think that I do remember a lot is as a kid, he did have time and he was there for us. Um, but I remember him working 2 part-time jobs for us. So one's at a grocery store, one at a convenience store. But yet he still had time for us, and he would always let us know that he doesn't want us to struggle, my brother and I, as much as him and my mom struggled in the sense of blue collar world. And they always encourage and install that we want you to go study and go to college and have a career on like they did. So there was a lot of that going on. My dad definitely had his own unique way of being a father, and nothing bad or good necessarily, but it was just a unique way how he was. And I was very close to him as a young kid. And I'm sure as we head on to the next question regarding mothers, I would say I changed my trajectory when I was a kid, very close to my father, but as I hit that pubescent age, I was closer to my mother.
Mm-hmm. There we go. So getting it from 2 different aspects. And Christopher, you had kind of a different experience growing up in a household with mostly women. So as we transition, start talking about, what are some things you learned about man rules in regards to your mother figure? So Christopher.
Yeah, my father wasn't around till I was like about 18. So really the only male in my household was my grandfather, who was diagnosed with a terminal illness when I was about 3 years old. He was given 2 years to live, and he lasted over 17. So he actually taught me to be strong, to be resilient. Even though he was confined to his bed for most of my life, he walked me through how to tie a tie, showed me love and care. And then moving on to the mother figures, that was all in my house. My mother, my grandmother, my aunts. So they just taught me how to, live my life and be a good person, and taught me, how to cook, how to clean, how to, be respectful. Really just raised me, to be a well-rounded man.
There we go. I noticed that a lot, like a lot of men who are raised by their mothers, they just tend to be a little bit they tend to be I wouldn't say like even out, but they get a not as big as a dose of all that forced masculinity as far as what you need to be in order to be, to be a man. I know earlier we were talking about cooking, and I grew up in a household where, my mother taught me how to cook. And even in my household, my wife, she loves for me to cook. She forces me, she'll buy certain things like, I know you know how to make this, and she'll make me make it. So I kind of did, but my dad growing up, he didn't really like me in the kitchen, but later on, as he wasn't in my life as much, I really enjoyed that. So it kind of contradicted some of those man rules that I grew up with. So Marco, what about you? So as far as some of those man rules or examples you've seen from your father figures or from your mother figures?
For the most part, I grew up in a single parent household, so I was just my mom. And she does have brothers, but we kind of kept us really sheltered away from family members just because of the life choices that they made. So, in regards to like father figures, I didn't really have any. So, she was both my mom and my dad. So pretty much she did everything. She taught us to cook. She taught us to clean. She taught us to fix cars. She taught us everything you can think of that a male figure would teach you. That was my mom. And she learned that from my grandfather, but my grandfather wasn't really around because he went back and forth between Mexico and living out there. So and then when we were old enough to kind of for him to move out here to be with us for a while, he only lasted a couple of years and then he passed away. So didn't really have much, but we didn't have like this is what a man does, this is what a female does. My mom taught us that you kind of need to do it for yourself and depend on yourself and not depend on anybody else to do it for you. So that's kind of how I grew up. I didn't really have those male figures and have those male boundaries where, men don't cry. My mom openly let us cry. And it has a lot to do with the fact that I grew up with my brother who has mental disabilities. So a lot of her time was spent with him. So I kind of was on my own for the most part of my childhood, which I feel, it's part of who I am. So that's kind of how I grew up. I didn't have the male figures like most people did. It was just my mom and my 2 siblings. So that was it, or basically my entire life.
Mm-hmm. There we go. So still in some way, it just seems like no matter, who we're raised by, whether it's our father, our mothers, or, a mix of both, somehow, we get different examples of how we show up, as men in different things. And some of it good, some of it bad, but we continue, to kind of work on who we are. Okay, all right. So let me see. Let me move on to this question. So gentlemen, how does man rules distract us from being the men we want to be? So for example, we talked a little bit about it. Rules like don't cry, don't be weak, don't show feelings other than anger, don't ask for help. So how does man rules distract us from being the men that we want to be? Joe.
I think it's the way you perceive it and the way you see it is how it kind of frames your mindset. So it could hinder relationships because you won't be open to discussion. So it's not just with your spouse, your girlfriend, your kids, your family members, because you can't open up to have discussions that could be, beneficial to the relationships. So as men, we tend to disconnect a lot. We tend to remove ourselves from conversations. We tend to walk away from certain things because we're taught not to open up. And if we start opening up, that could be like a floodgate for us to just have certain feelings come out, but we're supposed to keep all that in because we're strong, right? And I think that's what it does. It really hurts how we interact with the people that we love. It really hurts those relationships that we could be building. And it also hurts us internally because keeping everything in is not healthy, not just mentally, but physically, because stress and all that, all those different factors could lead to other health issues. So it's a combination of things. And it's pretty much what I've seen with a lot of my family members. I've caught myself doing it at times, but I think as we raise our kids, we're looking at changing that. So I personally have different discussions with my son. I let him know that you can cry if you fall. You can let us know if you're feeling a certain way. You don't have to keep that inside because it's not healthy. So he knows it's not healthy. So it's breaking that chain.
Yeah, there we go. I think about my dad. He wasn't a very emotional guy. I can honestly I can remember hugging my father until I was like 14 or 15. And now like I think about that as I was becoming a father. And the one thing I love to do, I love telling my sons that I love them. I love hugging them. At night I always go in their room because I want them to see that it's okay for you to show emotion. It's okay. You don't have to be, hard as a man. So yeah, so let me ask that to Christopher. Let me get that back to you. So what are some things you think distract us? So what are how does man rule distract us from being the men that we want to be, just being our authentic self?
I think it's really like society that kind of interferes with that sometimes because there's these expectations of what a man is and what a man is not. And if we don't fit that mold, then, we maybe feel, like at odds with ourselves or at odds with society.
Yeah.
Even simple things like the way we dress or the way we talk or, the things we're into. Really there's, certain parts of society that may frown upon that. And it really it can affect us mentally and emotionally.
There we go. Let me continue to pass that around. So gentlemen, what are some man rules that distract us from being the men that we want to be? Alex O.
Yeah, I think, everything that we learn, the good or the bad, um, it's equally, pushed, further when we're within, our social, environment. You know, um, I know one thing that my dad will constantly say is, go get me those good grades so I can, get you whatever you want for Christmas. And I work very hard to make sure my grades are good towards getting that. But I also realize that the moment my grades fall from the first to the third position, I hear it immediately. I hear it, so bad, you know, and I'm trying to be very emotional. And I equally hear him tell me, you want to cry just because he told me this? You want to cry? Cry. And he is from the very old school. Spanking was, the in thing. So the moment I tend to want to cry, the moment I hear the word cry, let me see you. and instantly I change that perception, I soak it in, I walk away, and then I'm looking for my mother so I can cry over her shoulder, because that's my safe net. If I can't do it in front of him, I can do it somewhere else. I think, that equally, transcends to, what happens to me, at an older age. I began to equally understand now I can show emotion. There's nothing wrong if I show emotion, that it makes me stronger and it makes me a human being, not a robot, So that's how I see it.
There you go. Yeah, in the excerpt from Dan Griffin in his book, he does this socialization process where he looks at certain characteristics and compares it to like, well, how do you, look at it in the feminine aspect, how you look at it in the masculine aspect, like as far as intellect. As men, we're supposed to show up logically intelligent, but women are supposed to be emotionally intelligent. When it comes to response to trauma, men are supposed to be aggressive and externalize everything, and women are supposed to retreat and be isolated and internalize it, or like that. So let me ask Alex Garcia. So what are some man rules, or how does man rules distract us from being the men that we want to be?
I want to go off a little bit what Christopher said, because it does stem from society, but it also definitely, not just society, but it stems back to school age, where you're a kiddo in elementary school, and if you're jumping rope as a boy, that's not okay from your friends who are male, but it was okay for your female friends. So for that, it was looked as a feminine thing. Why are you jumping rope? And then when it comes down to something else, like any other thing that happens on the playground, that's more what we consider masculine type of rough and tumble play, that was okay to do. So it just stems from elementary school, and you would get teased and or bullied, whatever the case may be. But it comes down from even just what that is in the society from an elementary school age point. It's interesting enough to look at my older sibling, where when he was younger, even though he's more than a few years older than me, was very vulnerable, had emotional situations where he could show his feelings and emotions. I noticed as we got older, both he and I still show my emotion. He doesn't anymore, which is really interesting. And it also stems, I feel it stems from what we do in our careers. Obviously, I'm in the mental health field, a licensed therapist, and he's an engineer. So he thinks logically always, I think emotionally. But, I think it bothers us back and forth with each other. So again, it's like, I'm not sure where they came from, where he was vulnerable at one point, but as he got older, the emotions are internalized as he's showing masculinity of some sort, or not like to show vulnerability for whatever reason on his end. And it also kind of scares me in a way of, his son, my nephew, is he allowing my nephew to be vulnerable and have some type of emotion or be able to share emotions? But I'm not there every day, but that just also makes me wonder. But again, it just kind of divides from school age. And I think what distracts us, it doesn't allow us to be our authentic self. It's okay to have some femininity to you if you're masculine, or vice versa. It's okay to be your authentic self. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go the direction of what that may be in your personal life.
Yeah. So many times it's like these characteristics, they receive, a gender. And like you said, it's like we start learning these guardrails from the blacktop, from the playground. So Tony, let me pass that to you. So thinking about that, these unconsciously we're learning these man rules, on the playground and in the workplace sometimes, depending on what type of field you're in. And being that, we work in social services, men are starting to become a rarity. So thinking about that, what are some man rules that distract us from being our authentic selves and who we want to be?
Right, got it. So let me just say this with a lot of professionalism and respect, right? So going to the school situation, ever since young, I've had this, I guess, gift, if you want to call it gift or talent, to be able to hear people. And so, but the intonation of the tone of voice, I had to always be careful though, because if I sounded too friendly, either I was seen as someone else, whether if it's orientation, or too flirtatious, right? And so that it was always that, as a man, you got to speak, certain tone, certain, affect, certain posture, right? And so as time went on, there was question about me because either spending too much time with a group of girlfriends or whatnot. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be hanging out with the boys, those that talk sports, right? And even within the profession or in the workplace, again, the intonation, it's like, okay, what do you speak like that? Well, I like being friendly because I want to understand people or I want to be social. But in reality, the intonation of the voice, it gets questioned like, okay, is it your orientation? Is it who you really are? Are you being too flirtatious with me? You're making me feel uncomfortable. So I believe that's the difficulty, within, anyone that could identify as a man or gentleman, because it's like you got to keep it a fine line, right? Because either you're starting to be too friendly and you're getting questioned, or you're either starting to flirt and gets questioned. So it's just very difficult within the workplace, within society, again, because that's my immediate thought. It gets questioned right away if it's not within the standard form, the way society sees
Go. Christopher, what do you think about that? All these things that distract us from being our authentic self, these things we pick up early in life on the playground and through our job roles.
Yeah, I mean, I have two boys and a daughter, and they're all like really close in age. Like they don't know life without each other. So I would constantly get comments from other people like, why do you let your boys play, dolls with your daughter? Or why is your daughter running around with a group of boys? And it was like I was just raising them to be themselves, like, to be good people, like not to fit some role. And seeing them play together, I didn't care if they were playing with trucks or dolls or whatever, they were playing together and not, they were getting along. So like, what is wrong with that? But I would definitely get a lot of comments from people like, why was I letting them do things that weren't traditional, stereotypical for their gender? So again, goes back to a lot of what society puts on us, and how we choose to, raise our kids maybe to be a little more independent, to, be free thinkers and not be stuck in those gender roles.
There we go. And as you're talking about toys, I remember growing up, I had I had a love for G.I. Joe, and I had every action figure, right? And you think about it, now that I'm older, I know that action figure is a word, to use to make it comfortable for a boy to play with a doll. An action figure is simply a doll. So as we talking about that, I used to love the Double Dutch. I was like, because it was fun. I was like, it was athletic, kept, and it was just fun to do. So, Marco, let me ask you that. So, what are some things, or how does these man rules distract us from being the men that we want to be?
I feel like man rules kind of put a constrict on their way of thinking. Like they don't allow them to be more open with their feelings and things like that. I mean, I remember growing up in school, I was the one that was picked on. I was that kid that showed up to school in those bright fluorescent colors. That was just the way I dressed in school throughout elementary school, high school. So it was just being questioned a lot about why were those colors, those ones for boys, those are for girls. And even now with my kids, like I have 4 kids. I have a tomboy. She's very boyish. I have my son who is asking to wear nail polish and looking at makeup with his sister, and it doesn't bother me because I like them to express who they are. But you do get questioned by other family members like my aunts, and then their kids question me about like why I let my kids do those things. And for me, it's more of them expressing themselves. But for them, they grew up in that era where this is what a man's supposed to be like, and this is what a female is supposed to be like, and you can't cross those lines. But I just feel like putting those roles, those specific rules and roles on people they kind of just keep you closed-minded and don't allow you to kind of understand people more on an empathetic level of just in general. They don't allow you to understand people in general. So yeah.
Okay. There we go. We talk a lot about that in some of our DEI classes, about that iceberg. It's hard to get beneath that water surface, with all these rules. It's just, it puts so many restrictions on us, and doesn't really allow us to show up the way that we need to. So here's another question I want to throw around. So how does man rules show up in a negative way in our lives, in our relationships? Consider our spouses, our partners, children's parents, friends, coworkers. How does that happen? And then thinking about, that we're men, work and our numbers are low in this particular field. So how does man rules show up in a negative way in our lives with with all those different type of relationships. Alex Garcia.
I would say that, and just to speak on vulnerability, I'll be vulnerable in everything. You know, I, as a young kid, or even through middle school, even probably even high school, probably, uh, I was bullied, and so because I was not as masculine as some of my peers in high school or middle school, or I was that late bloomer that my voice was still high pitched because puberty hadn't hit for me yet, and everyone else's voice had changed. You know, there was a lot of words that were shared that, you know, about who I was and, you know, my orientation or whatever that may be. So that's how it takes an effect. It becomes a negativeness in a way where someone's self-esteem or morale starts dropping. And then other things go from there. And being in the behavioral health, mental health field, right? You know, bullying is something that's not tolerated from what we hear, but yet it still happens and occurs. And it makes me sad to hear that when these kids I used to work with go through that and experience that. So that's how I look at it. And then as you get older, you know, as I got older, I'll just share that I had such self-conscious situations that if I acted a certain way, I'm going to be pinpointed a certain way, and it followed me. And I will admit, to this day, it still follows me, even though I know who I am now, and I'm not embarrassed about who I am, and it still follows me a little bit. So sometimes there's moments where I retract and regress, and I have to drop into a masculinity mode. And I say that humorously, and I also say it in a way of vulnerability. So there's times I drop more of an octave when I speak, or I make sure that I don't do certain, you know, mannerisms because I'm so used to it with my community. You know, so that's where I see how it becomes negative. But at the same time, at the end of the day, for me now, you know, I'm still working on it or still deal with it. What it matters to me is that who I am, and that's all that matters, and not other people's opinions should matter. And jokingly aside, you know, unless they're paying my bills, I pay them no mind.
There we go. I think we all have those moments, Alex, where like we feel we need to take it up a notch because of the environment, you know, that we're in. I could feel that in a room full of tall men sometimes, you know, being a little guy, you know, I'm small in stature and stuff, so all of a sudden I want to sit up straight, I want to shake people's hand a little bit firmer. My voice drops because, you know, I've been told sometimes on the phone I sound, you know, I sound like a granny or something like that. So I'm like, I was like, that's weird. So I change my voice, you know, and try to deepen it up a little bit. Alex, oh, you laughing. So let me ask you, so what are some man rules, or how does man rules show up in a negative way in our lives where like we have those moments where like, you know, that toxic masculinity, I gotta take it up a notch or something to make sure that everyone understands that I'm a man, you know.
You know, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, what I said earlier on about making sure I don't fail, you know. That's the first thing, you know, that I know, you know, haunts me, you know, every day. You know, I heard it so loud and clear, like I said, you know, I must have the best grade. I must have this. I must have that. And, you know, finding myself in different roles, you know, and leading, you know, others. I constantly have to tell myself sometimes, no, you can't fail. You have to find the answer. You have to know what it means. You have to learn it so you can be able to be successful. So, you know, in a way, it drives me, you know, to a point where, you know, I'm actually looking for self-actualization, but there's nothing like that, you know. And even in my previous role, it became a little more heightened, you know, at my previous job, where a failure of something or a miss of a compliance, you know, becomes so critical, you know, that I have to take it really to heart, you know, because that's how I have been, you know, trained, you know, consistently. I can't fail, you know. And coming in also to my new role and, you know, speaking to Kimberly during my interview, and that word she said, you know, here at Children's Bureau, we don't have all the answers. We're hoping when you come in also, you can be part of the answer. You know, that also gave me, you know, a sense of, you know, actualization that it's okay to make a mistake. it's okay. You don't have to know all, that is required, but you can keep learning. And, that's how I've constantly tried to strive to just keep learning, but to make sure I can suppress that inner feeling of you can't be seen as a failure.
There you go. Yeah, so that's one thing. Yeah, not failing and not not being successful, but sometimes, it's in those moments that we learn the most.
Yeah.
That we think back like, okay, all right. So what what did I take away from that? So just being able to, accept that, sometimes we make mistakes, but we can learn from it. We can learn from it. I love it. Good thing. Good thing. Christopher, what about you? So how does man rule show up in a negative way in our relationships?
I think piggybacking off what Alex G said, like I was late late bloomer to puberty, so like, and I always had long hair, so I would get teased a lot, in middle school, like you look like a girl, you sound like a girl. And it would have negative, impacts on me. And then even like, when I got to an adult life, grew up like a gothic kid, if you will. So I painted my nails black and wore eyeliner. And once I became a parent, like people were like, well, you shouldn't dress like that. You shouldn't look like that. Like, what kind of example are you setting for your kids? And it's like, I'm just trying to be me. Like, I'm trying to teach them to be themselves. But it really, I mean, it would have negative, effects with relationships, with family members, with partners, with spouse, whatever, because you're supposed to look and act a certain way. And if you don't, it's frowned upon.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking, as you were saying that, I'm thinking about me and my brothers. Like sometimes these man rules and all this stuff, but I guess from our father, we kind of learned that, one of us has to be in charge and stuff. It's kind of like Highlander. Only one of us can survive or something. So we're always constantly butting heads and trying to, outmaneuver each other and all that stuff. So let me see, Joe, let me give that to you. So how does man rules show up in a negative way in our relationships? Work, personal life.
It shows up in a bunch of different ways. I'll give you a little context into how those man rules kind of built in to me early on in my life. As a kid, like for the most part, I think all of us in here were bullied somehow in the school setting, right? I was bullied because I was a small, skinny kid,
Yep.
little runt. And that, I think that started that man rule mentality where I had to get bigger, stronger, become the tough guy. And as time went on and I got into high school, senior year, I just ended up becoming the bully, the guy who didn't take anything from anyone because of all the stuff he went through, all that trauma. And I was in the streets and I was being I was being the person I was not inside. That facade was just like it was all over. It was like that male bravado. I'm a tough guy. I'm gonna beat anyone up who comes up to me. That kind of transitioned into going into the military, right? And in the military, what do they teach you? The exact same thing. It's like this whole machismo. You're big, bad Marine. You can take on anything, right? But that still wasn't me. But all of that left traces of it into the person I am. So as I got older, I was figuring out ways of becoming that whole me, figuring out who I really was and how I wanted to present myself to others. And I think all that trauma and all that built-in, bravado that was instilled into me from the streets and the military kind of ushered away. It went away, right? As I started opening up. And I still find myself going back to it, reverting to it in certain situations. So I think that's kind of like where it leads back to how that has played a role in my life, because there's certain situations where I catch myself. I'm like, wait, what am I doing? This isn't me.
Yeah.
So that's where I see it as a barrier, because it didn't allow me to be the complete me, didn't allow me to be the person I knew I was, but it was like a cloak that I wore to protect myself from others. you know? So that was like the whole thing. And removing that cloak is one of the most difficult things you can do because you're taught not to be vulnerable, but now you're going to be vulnerable. And now you're going to let people attack you or hurt you, which that might not be the case, but that's how it's embedded in your mind.
No, that's amazing. You know, when you were saying that, I was thinking about like I realized and at junior high, that's a peculiar age. That's when you start trying to figure out the world around you and you're making adjustments and stuff. But I realized that you can't win by playing by the man rules. Because if you look at men who, you know, are constantly have these strict, you can't do this, or you can't, you know, you can't cry, you can't show emotion, you know, they're not good fathers, you know, they're not good brothers, you know, things like that. So trying to create your own rules or just get away from some of those negative man rules, you start to be the man that you want to be, right? So Marco, how do you feel about that? So in regards to man rules, how do they show up in a negative way when they come to our relationships?
Like most of my peers right here, I was picked on in school too. So I think the biggest thing for me is it made me second guess a lot of things, a lot of choices that I've made. It made me second guess just myself in general. Just because it's those are those rules, and it's picking on and people telling you this is the way you're supposed to look and the way you're supposed to dress and things like that. So even as I got older, I tend to kind of overthink things, and I feel like that was one of the most negative things that I've dealt with. And it's not until I got into the field of mental health that I'm starting to learn to like kind of let things go and just be okay with things being the way they are. So I think that was the biggest thing for me. It played a negative effect in the sense that I kind of overthink things a lot, and I second guess things a lot, and I'm very hard on myself. So that plays into the people picking on me and things like that. So yeah.
There you go. You know, the first thing is like now that we're aware, you can start looking at those things. Oh, that's just those embedded man rules trying to, you know, they're kind of making me feel that way, trying to put me into those guardrails. So Tony, what about you? So how do those man rules show up in negative ways in our relationships with each other as men, our spouses, partners, and our coworkers?
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up. But if I could do a quick side note, I believe Chris, you mentioned certain appearance or whatnot, right? And so I didn't understand this. Mind you, I mentioned earlier I respect my father and whatnot, but there were just some things that weren't adding up, right? So as I grew up, he would always cut my hair, quote unquote, right? And it was more like a trim, you know, it was like a trim because he would even put the scissors like kind of close to the ear, and I'm like, are you even cutting, right? So nowadays he questions my haircut like, oh, you know, are you sure that's appropriate for your profession? You know, does your supervisor tell you anything? What does the director tell you? Are you even putting a good representation for yourself? And I said, well, it's not bad. I mean, at least I don't see it bad, right? But has this mindset as to like appearance or whatnot, right? So continuously ingrains it, yeah. But that's a quick side note. Now, let me go back to the question. It's curious because my father once disclosed that his grandfather had told him, "Did you know that work is an unconditioned, in placed, um, like either a bad habit, right, or just a habit?" And he never understood that. And so till this day, he's about 70 something. He works as every day as he can, like I said before. So I didn't realize that myself as well. So I would be working 7 days a week, 7 days a week. And so as I started going out with my now fiance, she actually questioned, quote unquote, when are we going to have time for us? And that was an eye opener for me because I said, wow, that's true. Yeah, you know what? I mean, what better way than a Saturday or a Sunday morning, go breakfast or whatnot. But for me, in my mind, it's got to work every day, make that most money, make that most money. Monday to Friday here at CB, the weekend, a retail job or whatever it was to get money, 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 money. So that's where, these man rules, have impacted or were impacting my relationship. I got that eye opener as to what about that self care, a self care that I would always question, that quality time. So that's, how I could be able to share my personal experience.
Yeah, sometimes I struggle with that. My wife always gotta remind me to do something for myself. I'm always thinking about, okay, well, they need this, they need that. you know, and then I'll sit there and I'll complain. I'll sit there and complain. I'm like, I haven't bought me a new pair of shoes in so long. She said, go buy you a pair of shoes. You know, you're buying shoes for everybody else. So, you know, always having to be that provider. All right. Excellent conversation, gentlemen. All right. So as we close, I want to ask this last question. So what are 3 qualities you admire about yourself as a man? Think of man rules that reinforce a healthier idea of masculinity, while most of the rules are neither inherently bad nor good, and how they tend to enforce can rigidly or restrict. So 3 qualities you admire about yourself as a man, and man rules that actually reinforce a healthier idea of who you are. Let me give that to Christopher.
Oh wow, put on the spot first. I think at some point we grow up and we stop caring what other people think. So I think for me, that's allowed me to be the man I want to be.
Yeah.
And also impart that on my children. So I don't know if I have necessarily 3 qualities, but I think just being your authentic self, and just, you know, showing that to whether it's your kids, your nieces, your nephews, the people around you, that it's okay to be your authentic self and break, you know, stereotypical gender norms and all that, and just be happy.
There we go. Thank you so much, Christopher. And Tony, what are 3 qualities you admire about yourself as a man?
Yeah, very similar to Christopher, and sorry that I'm always kind of reflecting back on anyone that has previously shared, but it's just common, right? I don't think I would be able to say 3, but if I could, right, I mean, just say the following: that I like to be this kind of outgoing guy, right? You know, just have a nice environment, not perceive it as, okay, you're gonna get to know me because this is who I am and I'm distinguished because of this. Now there are very some attributes that we all have that might distinguish us, right? And I'll just say that, like for me, a lot of people think that I'm an old soul, philosopher kind of thing. Okay, cool. Right? I mean, other people are like, you know what, you're very understanding, you're very quote unquote charm. All right, cool, right? But at the end of the day, for me, it's like as long as it feels nice and natural, you know, just a relaxed environment as opposed to let me act in a way that it's not gonna make me feel controlled or have to like, oh, you know, I can't, you know, step out because I'm gonna get questioned. So I believe that's what I want to point out because throughout my life, and I'm gonna say it time after time after time, and I'm going to make a clear point, perhaps, that I always had this mindset: what is my father going to think? What is my father going to think? What is my father going to think? And I believe that that's the unconscious point that I would want to make right now. That you know, there's no qualities that I could describe myself because I don't know if they would be good for my father, right? And that's my mindset. So just as long as the environment feels good and relaxed, I believe that's the best quality that I can.
There we go. Thank you, Tony. All right, and Marco, what about you? What are 3 qualities you admire about yourself as a man?
I can't say that there's like specific 3 qualities I admire, but I do want to say that like for me, watching my kids kind of be open with themselves and not let those rules kind of dictate their lives, that kind of has helped me come out of my shell in a sense and being more comfortable. And like Christopher said, regardless if we're doing something good or something bad, someone's always going to have something to say. So it's kind of just not paying attention to what people have to say and kind of just doing it for yourself and you being okay with that. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marco. And Alex O, tell me, what are 3 qualities you admire about yourself as a man?
3 qualities. That's a huge task to go by. Take me back again to I can't feel, right? You know, I think as human as I can be, I try to make sure I come in, you know, with an open mindset to anything that is going to happen. You know, I learned, you know, how to not be judgmental, you know, but to be supportive of anyone's journey, including the journey that I'm embarking on, you know. And just to piggyback also on what Christopher said, you know, my brother will say, listen, if people don't talk about you, that means you're dead, you know. So give them an opportunity to speak and to say things about you. Then you know who you are, and that makes you more aware of either what you need to tweak to change or what you need to drop completely, you know. So I try to learn based on that, thoughts behind me.
Wow. When you say that, I think about, like you said, things I'm trying to reduce or I'm trying to drop. I think that it's nothing that I need to gain. I think it's things I need to let go of, and then I'm my authentic self. It's those bad habits and those things. And as I drop those off, I start becoming the man that I want to be. And Alex G, what about you? What are 3 qualities you admire about yourself as a man, or 3 things that you're getting better at that you like about yourself?
I would say that I think I've become more authentic with myself, more in my current age of the early 40s than I was in my 30s and 20s. So it's always good for me. I've been looking back and reflecting back how I was in those 2 types of age ranges, but I think it's made me who I am now, the man who I am now sitting here. But overall, I think for me, I always definitely provide a lot of respect across the board. And as even Alex O mentioned about learning and being non-judgmental, although we have that flair to be at times, just comes with with the trait of society. But me just always keeping an open mind to learn from others, and hopefully they learn from me. And then in the long run, like for the first time in probably in a while for myself, I think for me, I feel very confident in myself of what I do every day, not necessarily with work or my peers, but just me as a human every day, to make sure that I'm always growing and you never stop learning.
There we go. I was hoping someone would bring it in, but being a constant learner and just learning as a man. There we go. So just learning. Love it. And Joe Gallardo, if you go ahead and you wrap us up. So 3 qualities you admire about yourself as a man, or 3 things you're doing better at.
Thank you. I think one of the biggest things would be being able to love and be vulnerable. That's one of the hardest things I've had to encounter because of all the things that were instilled in me in terms of being a tough guy and being a man, right? Learning from previous mistakes and figuring out ways to not fall back into that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing I would say, and this is probably the one that I hold the closest, is actually trying to have a relationship with your kids, your son, building that, showing them certain things that weren't taught to you,
Mm-hmm.
and allowing them to be their whole self, not restricting who they are, what they like, where they want to go, and what they want to do, and then teaching them that being a man doesn't mean you have to be this way. Being a man can be that you open doors and you say thank you and you appreciate people instead of being that strong, tough guy that everyone looks at with fear. So that's kind of how I look at it. Chivalry isn't dead. We just haven't taught our kids that yet.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I really enjoyed this conversation. This was so great. So I really appreciate you for showing up for our day of learning. Hey, if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure that you go into the chat right now. What are some man rules that you may know of that may restrict you or restrict those that you love from being their authentic selves? All right. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. And we'll see you real soon. You take care.